Essay 230, audit documentation. So what is the meaning of audit documentation? The audit documentation is simply record of audit procedures performed and relevant audit evidence obtained on which conclusion is further reached. Then comes the purpose. Purpose includes the following. The first is assist in planning and performing of audit. Second is direction, supervision and review of work. Then comes the to fix accountability, and then to act as record for future reference. And it also helps in quality control review and inspections known as peer review, and then conduct of external inspections. So this was the purpose for audit documentation. Then comes the nature. Documentation must provide for sufficient and appropriate record. What do you mean by sufficient? Sufficiency refers to the quantum of audit evidence, and appropriateness refers to the quality of the record. So sufficient and appropriate record of the basis for auditor's report, and the evidence that the audit was planned and performed in accordance with essays and other regulatory requirement. That is the nature of documentation. So then comes the form, content and extent of documentation. The auditor shall prepare audit documentation that is sufficient to enable an experienced auditor to understand what was the NTE of the audit procedure, that is nature, time and extent of audit procedure, and then result of audit procedure performed and audit of evidence obtained, and then is significant matters arising during the audit and the conclusion reached thereon, significant professional judgments made in reaching those conclusions. What are the factors affecting the form and content and extent of audit documentation? This one is important. It is also there in RTP November 2020 also. The size and complexity of the entity, the nature of the audit procedure to be performed, to identify the risk of material misstatements, the significance of audit evidence obtained, nature and extent of exceptions identified, need to document a conclusion or the basis for a conclusion not readily determinable from the documentation of work performed or audit evidence obtained. And seventh is the audit methodology and tools used. So simply is the factor affecting form and content and extent means the what are the reasons because of which the audit documentation file or work paper may become a big file, or it can be remain as small, or considerably less work paper will also do. Okay, so the six important points for factor affecting form and content and extents are size and complexity of the entity, the nature of audit procedure to be performed, identified risk of material misstatements, significance of audit evidence obtained, nature and extent of exceptions identified, need to document a conclusion. The conclusion not readily determinable from the documentation of work performed or audit evidence obtained. The last one is the audit methodology and tools used. And in three cases there is need of specific documentation. What are those three cases? The documentation of discussion, where the significant matters are discussed with management and TCWG. Those are required to be documented. Okay, documentation regarding when and with whom the discussion took place. Then comes how the auditor addresses the inconsistencies. Inconsistency simply means that the variation in the information supplied by the management and TCWG and the information that auditor derives or auditor finds during the audit procedure. So when there is the inconsistencies or mismatch between the two, then how the auditor addresses those inconsistencies, these shall also be documented. Then the second is documentation of departure from relevant requirement, reasons for departure and alternative procedures performed. So in this, where the auditor does not comply with the particular standards on auditing, or doesn't comply with the steps given in an audit, standards on auditing, then why he did not apply the same, or why did not comply with the same, and how and what are the alternative procedures performed by the auditor with this regard. And then comes the documentation of matters arising from date of auditor's report. Okay, after the date of auditor's report, suppose the audit report has been drafted, and after that, subsequent to that, auditor encounter some circumstances which were not there while he was drafting the audit report. So what were the circumstances encountered? New or additional procedures performed by the auditor, audit evidence obtained and conclusion reached, and their effect on auditor's report, when and by whom the changes to audit documentation were made and reviewed. So these were the documentation of matters arising after the date of auditor's report. And then comes the retention period for working paper or audit documents. The working papers are supposed to be retained for the period of 7 years. And ownership, the documentation is the property of the auditor, and he may at his discretion make portions or extracts from documentation available to the client. So this was SA 230, audit documentation.